Well, hello everybody, and yes, thank you for being here this afternoon. On this session, we're going to do a panel discussion which is about 30 years of authentication and access management in libraries. We weren't too sure actually how long we had. We thought we had 40, then it looks like we had 20 minutes, so we have cut it down a bit, but we've just been told we can overrun a little bit. The good thing is I was going to do quite a long history piece on authentication, which some of you might be happy is now shortened to a small amount, and we'll just be right into the discussion bits. So my name's James Edwards, and I'm a Senior Business Development Manager for OpenAthens, and I help libraries, researchers, users understand the methods of authentication out there, particularly in the library and research space, and then understand the value that OpenAthens can bring them, particularly through federated access, and sort of how that can help remove barriers to knowledge and help your users get on to do really great things. I'll also be joined for the panel discussion by Athena and Brian here. They're going to do some introduction in just a moment. I'm just going to first run through that sort of history bit and a little bit of OpenAthens and yeah, how we all begun. So going really right back to the beginning, in 1974, the internet kind of idea began. There was a paper written about Transmission Control Protocol, the TCP. I don't know much more about it than that, but it was written by Vincent Cerf and Robert Kahn, and that is what founded the internet a few years later. And then, so once the internet was up and running, the actual IP address was born. So the IP addresses we use today, IPv4, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, that was first used in 1984. The first one in the public internet was used by the US Department of Defense. And so that's over 40 years ago, and we're still using that technology today. So maybe think about that a little bit, what other technology you're using that's 40 years old at the moment. It is still the most prevalently used method of access, IP, and it's probably a good chance to sort of mention, I often get it confused or I get them mixed up as I speak, but there's a difference between authorization and authentication. And so authorization is really just saying this person can have access to something, and authentication is actually validating the user, so actually knowing that this user is kind of who they say they are. And so when we talk about IP access, it's really that method of recognition or authorization. It's not really authenticating, because you don't know the person on that IP address who they actually are, whereas authentication does tell you in some format that that user is who they say they are. And so there's quite a big difference there, and particularly when you're looking at security and things, that's something that comes into play with it. But it's just something to think about as we go through the discussion on that sort of terminology that might come up. So after 1984, people start using the internet now. You're going to start people accessing it remotely from home, on the campuses as well. They've got their own ITs. But in 1995 was the year when OpenAthens was actually born, and it's quite not as we know it as it is today, though. So OpenAthens started back in the University of Bath in the UK. So the library team there had all these usernames and passwords for all these different resources, and was like, this just doesn't work. How can we make it better? And so Project Athena, as it was called back then, started. Now Athena was trademarked for another shop at the time, and so Athens was then chosen as the name. And so from 1995 moving onwards, in the first few years of the service, it was just a sort of username and password based system, and in that sort of username and password, it wasn't single sign-on. So the users had to log into every site with the same username and password. Not ideal, but it was better than what they were using before that. And then in 2002, there was SAML started. Does anyone know what SAML stands for? Yeah, language, yeah.
Markup language?
Markup, almost, yeah. So just a little bit before that.
I forget the essay.
Security assertion markup language. Bonus points out there. And so that was 2002. So the first version of SAML, and SAML is a big part of what OpenAthens is built on. So I just wanted to mark that as a milestone. In 2005 and 2007. There was a bit of a shift with OpenAthens. So at the start, we were just using proprietary information to technology to build the service, but then standards were coming in. Standards are all very important. So we made a shift to then move to match those sort of standard-based technology, and that lent in 2007, OpenAthens was then launched as the brand because we were using those open source standards, and then the Athens part tie into it. And then lastly, really coming out from that, 2013, the Federation was bought. And so you'll hear a lot about federations today in the discussion, and federated access. And the Federation underpins everything that OpenAthens does, or what makes us unique anyway. It's basically a shared trust network where IPs, such as libraries, librarians, and service providers, the publishers and the platforms, they will come together to work together under like an agreed shared way of working, and it really simplifies everything, making setups much easier, and a really nice secure way of accessing content. And that's really what's key and so unique about those federations. A couple of other things then to say. IPv6, so the next IP addresses we might eventually go on to, because IPv4s will run out. They launched at around 2012. I don't know anyone in the room using an IPv6, their institutions now. Interestingly, some places are trying to mandate it a little bit. We're hearing now as going forward that you'll have to have some sort of compatibility with them, but we're not seeing any of it, particularly not in our sector. Our sector is very unique. We still use IPv4 so much, so something to look out for, but honestly, it's a whole different chain of code. Yeah, it's all very different for IPv6. And then also there are other methods of authentication systems out there in terms of the sort of the technology. So I've talked about SAML. Another one is OpenID Connect. That was kind of launched in about 2014, and it's used quite heavily in sort of the personal way of logging into things, so within the social media sites and things like that, where you might have personal accounts and a way of authenticating through their systems. We do see it a little bit in ours. OpenAthens is compatible with it in some formats, but we haven't seen the need for an OpenID Connect federation yet, but it is something we are looking into. So all of that has then built to the OpenAthens Compass. So if you aren't sure what Compass means, it is the brand name for the OpenAthens product that you would have heard about for the last 30 years as we've gone on. We have now the library product. This one is called Compass. And what's so unique about us is we are a blend of IP recognition, managed IP proxy, and that federated authentication all in one product. And so we bring you a true single sign-on system that really helps give your users a much better user experience in a really safe environment. And really key to that is the privacy preserving. That at the heart of everything we do, that is what we want to keep and maintain. Sometimes you're not too sure about how it's all working. If you want to know more about Compass and federations, happy to have a discussion after this, as that's all the detail we're going to go into it for today. But now we're going to jump into the panel discussion. So yes, with me today, we've got Brian and Athena. Athena, do you want to introduce yourself a bit more?
Sure. I'm Athena Hepner at the University of Central Florida. I've been there for 30 years, quite a long time, and most of that career I've spent as some version of an electronic resources librarian. So when we first started using Easy Proxy through our consortia at the time, I was the person who was trying to help make that happen at the university. On up through, we're now on OpenAthens. I was the person who managed that transition at our university, again in coordination with the consortia. So we haven't been going it alone, but I've been the point person at the university for that work.
And you were the brave first person to do it, the first university.
I was eager.
Yep. So I'm Brian Erb, and I'm the Director of Library Support and Training at Florida Virtual Campus. So a little background about Florida Virtual Campus. We are a library consortia. We exist in statute in the state of Florida, which is a little, not terribly unusual, but a little unusual maybe. We are mandated by the state legislature to provide centralized library services for the 40 public academic libraries. So this would include 28 state colleges and 12 state universities. So the things we provide, for example, a centralized ILS, we have a statewide e-resources budget, we do e-resource opt-ins, sort of a group licensing program, and then we also provide support for digital services and OER. And one of the services we provide is OpenAthens.
Cool, perfect, thank you. So we're going to jump into discussion now. There will also be time for questions from the audience at the end. We have found we've got a little bit more time to play with, so we'll certainly make sure we have some input from ourselves. So I guess we'll start off with sort of maybe yourself, Brian. Looking back over the last 30 years, what was the biggest challenge that your library faced with IP access?
Sure. So
how did that shape your?
Sure. So from the consortia point of view, when I began working at FLVC in 2018, we had sort of a hybrid system for dealing with authentication with our institutions, and that was sort of a holdover from the fact that FLVC used to be two separate organizations, one for the colleges and one for the universities, that were squashed together into one organization in 2015. So what we had at the time when we started looking at potential replacements was we had a homegrown e-resources management system that had been built and sort of iterated over the years for several decades, I believe. And it ran on Easy Proxy, but it had some other e-resources management tasks weaved into it, some acquisition stuff, et cetera. And it was just kind of built by our own developers. And it was increasingly no longer up to the task in sort of a modern environment of doing what we needed it to do. The universities, for the most part, managed their own instances of Easy Proxy during that time. And so we wanted to replace this with something that had many more modern capabilities. So the first thing we wanted was just a system that was easy to centrally manage and manage for all 40. We didn't want a two-tier system. We sort of were following a mandate that we didn't want to keep those old silos between the colleges and universities. We wanted to make sure that our services now served everyone, for the most part, a few small exceptions. We wanted something that was easy to either centrally manage or the library themselves could take a large role in managing, because our consortia has a massive array of library types. So as you know, in Florida, we probably have 4 or 5 of the largest Research One universities in the country by FTE. We also have little tiny state colleges that have 1 librarian. So we wanted something that I could manage centrally for everyone if they wanted, but the universities have a lot of staff. They take an interest in doing their own things, and if they wanted to do most of their stuff, they can too. Or we can do a hybrid. So we wanted something that had a good management model. We also wanted something that we could manage permission sets. So one thing you were talking about, authorization versus authentication. Since OpenAthens is identity-based, it's not location-based, it's identity-based. So we know things about those users when they're authenticating. So we can do things like set up permission sets. So imagine a school has a law library, a medical library. We want to be able to say that only certain people have access to these certain things, so that not only could the libraries license things very, very narrowly, and we can manage the permissions, we can also get data on that stuff. So because it's identity-based, we can actually see who's using what. So imagine we have a permission set up to allow certain users, but we also know who's actually using it. So imagine the law library is funding something, but they actually fund it for everyone. I can look and say, well, is it law people using it? Is everyone using it? Maybe that's not the best funding model if it's a law thing that everybody's using. So you can use that identity to do a lot of interesting things with your collection. And also, getting into data, because it's identity-based, you can do really interesting assessment stuff with OpenAthens data. So you can actually use OpenAthens data to look at the impact of usage of e-resources on student success metrics. And that's really interesting, and that's something we were really interested in when we started. Especially in Florida, because of some of our funding model, it's really imperative that libraries be able to show that not only are people using stuff, but that use is impacting student success. And OpenAthens data, because it's identity-based and we can put attributes into people's accounts so we can see various aspects of who's using what, it allows us to do that. And I might talk more about that later. I want to go into it because I can go way into it.
Yes, you can. Thank
Tina's
goodness.
heard this 1,000.
My notes just closed. All right, well, thinking back to the early days of authentication and when we were moving away from username and password authentication, thankfully, and moving into IP authentication, it was great because it was easy. Anyone on campus could get in, and we really didn't have to do anything other than report our IPs to the vendors, except, of course, off-campus users. And we relied on Easy Proxy, which props to Chris Ziegler, how is it pronounced? I'm not sure which of those two, but to create a tool that has been so impactful for off-campus access and our users being able to get to content is amazing. He's done something that was transformative in our profession. And it helped UCF because we have been for a long time a campus that has emphasized online learning and distance users, and we've had partnerships throughout the state with various community colleges. So our users were distributed. Our campus was not really, though. Our networking IT folks really managed the campus IT network, and for a while we had partnerships where we would send an IT person out and they would set up the IP address to be the same as ours at some community college. So there were 5 computers that students from our institution could use at Valencia. But that was problematic for licensing reasons. It's problematic for managing the network and IT technology. And it was problematic for training. The librarians at those other remote sites were not our librarians. So it was a challenge. And in addition to that challenge, the other huge challenge with IP-based authentication and easy proxy was the starting point URL versus deep link. We found that our courses and our course management system were full of links that were deep links to things that the faculty member found after being authenticated through easy proxy, because they needed to do that. They'd grab the URL from the top, pop it into a course, and then next semester it'd be broken. Or we changed our IP address in some way, or our proxy service in some way, and our domain name was different. And then we have all of these links that were fundamentally problematic because the host name for the easy proxy is embedded in the middle of this string, or I said that backwards. The easy proxy host name is first, but the rest of the link that I needed to change would be embedded in the middle of a string. Anyway, it was a management nightmare, and there was no solution that we could turn to that would fix it in a thorough and quick way. So when we saw SAML coming along, and Internet 2 through InCommon Foundation, we reached out to Campus IT and said, we really want to be part of this. This seems like it's going to be a solution to these problems we're having. But then we faced another challenge, which was a whole bunch of the vendors were not yet using SAML-based authentication. They weren't members of InCommon. And our Campus IT folks really didn't understand why we were interested. So we had all these hurdles. And I think I'll stop there because the question was about challenges. So those were the biggest challenges, providing equal service throughout our distributed set of users and providing links that weren't just going to break periodically as small changes happened.
Perfect, thanks. Yeah, and I think, going on that from Brian, you started to go into it. So how has that shift in that sort of federated authentication changed the way you now manage the access and your users?
So it's just way easier in a consortia because I can see problems that other people are going to have and fix those problems for everyone. So if somebody in the federation has some kind of access issue, or vendors do weird things, they change domains, they add domains. I mean, I can immediately see a problem, and it's like, well, I know I can immediately look in Consortium Manager and see that, oh, we have 30 other schools that have this product. I can just immediately fix it for everybody. And just being in a federation is so much easier because of one fix applies to all your schools. Yeah.
And on your level, is that?
So the shift away from IP to using federated access has solved a lot of our problems. When we were using IP authentication, we had tied it to our single sign-on through our authentication identity management system at UCF. But it would sort of break as people went outside of using a library link as their starting point. They would end up with no way to connect back in. And so once we had single sign-on that could extend outside of our own university, I could land on a Wiley article, even though it was an email that someone sent me, and here's a link to an article. I don't have to strip out a IP or easy proxy starting point from it. I can just click on it, and it takes me to Wiley, right? But then I can, even before seamless access, I can just say, okay, use their where are you from? You have to find UCF. So having the federated access made us able to provide single sign-on in a much better way. The other part of that, of course, is there's session cookies that persist. So if they've already logged in once into, for instance, their UCF account, and then they go to use the library account, they're not seeing a separate login. Or if they go to use the Wiley account, they may have to go through the where are you from, but they still don't have to do another login. So it really resolved a lot of the hurdles that users were stumbling on before. It's been much smoother.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit more about that from the consortia point of view because I implemented so many schools and I can actually see data on this. So, in essence, the federated access separates, let's see if I can say it a good way. easy proxy and IP connect a user to a resource. A federated access connects a resource back to the library. So it doesn't matter what your access point is. You don't ever have to go to the library. You never, ever, ever have to touch the library web presence to do your research. And there's a point in your OpenAthens implementation where you can see data on this. So when you first start your OpenAthens implementation, OpenAthens flips you to what's called permissive access. And that means every vendor in the federation now knows you're in the federation and can recognize your users when they log in. But you haven't Athenized anything on your web presence yet. So the only way people would be using OpenAthens is if they were Googling around and, oh, there's a Wiley article. Let's see what this find your institution button does. And you can immediately start seeing data. And the most recent school we implemented at University of Florida, 500 to 1,000 accessions a day like that. I had days over 1,000 accessions. That means a user has their cookie passed to the vendor to let them into a resource. And those accessions had to come through. Somebody just Googled around and found, oh, here's an Elsevier article. What does this button do? And it's an insane amount of usage this way. And you immediately see, oh, people aren't going to the library first. And this lets people use their licensed resources from any point, any beginning user journey. They don't have to start at the library webpage. And it's a massive amount of usage. I was shocked to see how much. And presumably people have been doing that all along and just been getting skunked. They're like, oh, I guess the library didn't have this, So yeah, so it opens up so much more usage, for your students and faculty. Yeah.
And I think we touched on earlier, and with that, when we talk about users not coming through the library, maybe there's a concern about the content they're going to, or actually the user themselves and what they're having to pass to the vendor. So on that, how have your sort of privacy concerns and data protection regulations influenced your sort of authentication strategy over the years?
Yeah, this might be one. You want to tackle that one first, Athena?
So with IP authentication, we had really no privacy concerns, right? It's not going to know who an individual is, just that they were able to use a network that had that IP address. When we were interested in SAML, I never became interested or concerned about privacy, and I think I'm not the norm in that regard, because I understood immediately that it is passing the attributes that we choose to pass. So I was never concerned about the privacy. In fact, I think can be, it has the potential to be more privacy deserving, at the same time offer personalization. I'm not seeing a lot of the personalization that I'd really love to see. What I want to do, now I'm just going to be pie in the sky here for a second, apologies. What I want is to have a very rich set of attributes about every single user. Pass them to OpenAthens, pass those to the vendors, and then have the vendor say, oh, here is a UCF student who is in biology and they're second-year student. And it could even have more details. And then it'd say, I'm doing a search for you, but look, I'm going to use AI now. You had to come into the conversation somewhere. And use the result set and my understanding of you as a user and do some maybe summarization at a level that makes sense to you and with your discipline background. I'm not seeing that yet, but it could be done with OpenAthens and with SAML passing attributes. Because I don't have to choose to send any attributes that identify an individual to the vendors. I can get all that rich responsiveness without compromising anything about the personal identity of the person.
Yeah. So from the consortial point of view, we did have some concerns about exactly that. When I talk about attributes being passed to OpenAthens, people are like, whoa, being passed to OpenAthens, does that mean the vendors can see them? It's like, no, there's kind of a multi-tier. You can put up gates wherever you want. So when a student logs in, when they enter their username and password and their SSO, that creates for them an account in OpenAthens, and you can populate that account with anything that they can pass to you. So at the consortia, we'll set things up so that the schools can pass whatever attributes they want to that account. But then there's a gate that you can keep closed without passing any of that stuff to the vendor, but you can make it reportable in your data. So we handle just certain things like you were talking about, what department people are in, what their alma patron group is. But schools can also pass student ID to OpenAthens if they want to. And it's not because they want to know what John Smith or Debbie Jones was looking at. It's they want to be able to say this student ID also has these other characteristics. Don't need to know a name, but then we can group those student IDs by those characteristics and see how they're using the library or if they're using the library. Then we can also look and see, well, how's their retention? What are their grades like? And can we see that using library resources is related to improvements in those metrics? So yeah, that's really interesting. In the cases where you would pass attributes to a vendor is when it improves the user experience. So for example, if you have a database like ArtStore, like Overdrive, something where once they're on the platform, they have their own tools. You can pass them, say, email address, and that way they don't have to log in again at that vendor. It just passes them straight into their bespoke environment. And what you were talking about, we can do way more than that. I mean, don't you guys have a relationship? I couldn't remember the vendor where you're actually experimenting with passing attributes to a vendor so they can do your counter reports by those attributes. Is it Elsevier? Is it your house? Is it Elsevier?
Yes, it is Elsevier.
It's
I don't know
Elsevier.
if that how public. Okay, but yes, yeah, that is.
Yeah,
that,
I mean,
yes,
so
that's-
conceptually, imagine a school is passing, college or department to OpenAthens. You could then pass that to a vendor if they're capable of receiving it, and then their counter reports can say, hey, look at your various metrics and counter. It looks like biology students have this many item requests, this many title requests, and then, chemistry students have this many item requests, because they could use those attributes to parse out your data. So this is all conceptually could be done if vendors can do it. Yeah.
Now, one area that is frustrating is when vendors do require us to send email addresses of our users. And frequently it seems like there's no justifiable case for it.
Yeah.
Sometimes there is, where it's going to be, this individual has the right to use this book that has DRM for this long. I think that could be done pseudonymously, but so if any vendors in the room are requiring email addresses, please reconsider. Our users like to be anonymous unless they explicitly choose not to be.
Yeah, that is a good point. We do try to now push the vendors on that. So yeah, if you are getting requests for an attribute that you're not certain about, then please involve any of your support team you have, and we might be able to have a conversation just to see, is there something else we can use that isn't identifiable yet in any way? We have gone over the sort of 20 minutes, and we're not sure we've got 40, but we can have the room for 40. I just thought at this point, anyone have any questions they would like to ask? Yes?
Could you talk for a minute about any tips for implementation? And hot tips, since we don't have a lot of time.
Sure. So I think, because I've done this 40 times now, it's just rote to me now, but probably have a plan for think carefully about your access points. If you're implementing OpenAthens, you have to change your links, and you have to make sure that every access point you have out there gets Athenized, as I call it, so that it routes away from Easy Proxy into OpenAthens. And think about the right order to do it again. So we're Alma Primo library, the state is Alma Primo. And so you just think about the coherent order to get things Athenized once you have your go live date. So I usually start with an A to Z list. That can be automated with find and replaces. You export things into a spreadsheet. Once you know how the various publishers work, there's a handful of rules, and you can just find and replace in the stuff you need in those. Doing your Alma environment, there's a handful of vendors that have special rules. You deal with those first, then you can just flip your defaults proxy away from Easy Proxy into OpenAthens. LibGuides, subject guides, there's a way to automate that. There's a module in the back end where you can find every instance of your Easy Proxy prefix, and there's a little sort of upload sheet that you can fill out, and SpringShare can load it for you, and it'll just change everything. So it seems intimidating at first, but if you break it into pieces and just carefully think about all your access points and do them one at a time, it's not as hard as it seems, and I can offer tips to anybody who emails me.
I do want to address this. I saw your hand too, but it's not intimidating if your data is clean.
Yeah,
and your data is probably not clean. So do check your catalog for deep links using Easy Proxy that's not a starting point URL. Same with your learning management system. Alert your faculty well in advance, and maybe just have them, if you can, work with librarians to recreate the links using OpenAthens. We tried using some coding to try and find and fix the links. It was mostly, it had to be either we're just abandoning this whole 20,000 links that are already broken. These ones we're hoping that they will get around to changing as faculty members, because we had no rights to go and edit the links in the course management. And these ones we were able to find and tell them, here's the correct links. But it's gonna be a while. One last bit of advice, if you're using a journal jobber, like EBSCO, they can maybe help you identify all those little publishers that you maybe aren't thinking of, and make sure that they're already, that they're also gonna be transitioned to OpenAthens.
Don't turn off your easy proxy immediately.
No.
Well, you guys turned off yours, right? Y'all don't have.
Oh, we don't have it anymore.
Well, you haven't
We've
very
been
easy.
for years
You did it
now.
Yeah, you turned off your easy proxy after about a year.
We put it on ice after a year, but
Yeah.
it was still there for another couple of years for reasons, but for Iliad reasons.
Yeah.
She had a question.
So now that users are no longer getting skunked, as Brian said, have you done any marketing to users to kind of let them know
So the
that
institutions
the library is responsible for that?
Yeah, the institutions kind of all did that. Did you do any marketing during the change?
No, we did outreach to inform people who might be affected, but the students, they're not going to notice.
No.
They
I
just
mean, it's a big success story that I think, libraries should take
Yeah.
responsibility for. We talk about how we're losing value, and I think it's a really
see what
good
you
way to promote the value instead of just letting it go quietly.
Yes, and that, I understand the question now. Yes, after the fact, we were able to take to our administration the huge reduction in problem reports and problems that we had to deal with at the start of the semester and throughout the semester. So in that way, yes, we did. It's been long enough that we don't tout it every year, because there's no, the point of comparison is too
Yeah.
far in the past at this point, yeah.
Yeah, so you do feel like there's been way less troubleshooting?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it's
I mean,
much easier.
Yeah, it seems like it to be, definitely. And just the troubleshooting stuff is so much easier because you have a community. So, for example, you all have customers that are, well ahead of us, and I'll come into my office and people in like Australia or whatever have already seen a problem with a vendor and taken care of it before I was like, I just need to, I'll see everything solved in real time. It's like, I'm glad that's taken care of. The Eastern Hemisphere took care of that. And so you have like a whole community, and there's a really active listserv, and like people put their heads together and just figure things out quick. I mean, everybody's on it. If there's any vendor that suddenly isn't working through OpenAthens, everybody's on it, and a million people put in cases all at once, and it gets fixed. So the publishers, I feel like most of the publishers, we run into a few publishers that are still like weird about like, man, we can't do OpenAthens, which of course you can list an IP, can't you? So OpenAthens is essentially, there's sort of three tiers of the way you authenticate through OpenAthens. One's the Federation, and that's just plain super easy. If a vendor's in the Federation, it's just one or two clicks and everything's ready. There is a hosted proxy, so for vendors that aren't in the Federation, OpenAthens has a hosted proxy, but it works different than Easy Proxy. There's still a SAML handoff, and all that happens, it just happens to the OpenAthens proxy. I got that right? I can see it in the network traffic. I knew that from interpreting the network traffic. So it's still way better than Easy Proxy. It's a better solution because it still has some of the aspects of SAML. And then your third option with some vendors is they'll want to do a one-to-one SAML connection. So picture a vendor, they could do a proxy setup if they wanted to, but they need attributes for some reason, and it's usually to improve your experience. One that comes to mind is ICE Learning Library. The students can have like a little video library that's their own little bespoke area, and it's good to be able to send them attributes so students can use their own little area better. They could set that up as proxy, but it's more usable if we set it up as one-to-one SAML. They're not in the Federation, so we just kind of set up a direct connection to them without using the Federation as a central node, and it's easy. You just OpenAthens, it has it really easy to set up the app and do it that way. So there's like pretty much three ways that you would access something through OpenAthens.